Hello everybody, Brad Johnson here, and as I promised through my live webcasts, I was going to be talking about a very important topic when it comes to the nature of time, about why there is time acceleration and why there may also be time deceleration. We're going to be looking at the inner mechanics of the passage of time. This is something that really came to me in a great state of realization when I was in Egypt. So as we were in Egypt, myself and my fiance and the participants that were along for the Halls of Amenti tour, when I got to Egypt, I started to notice that as we were there for the first couple of days, everything pertaining to the nature of time was extremely slow, right? So again, it's not to say like you don't look at a clock and you still don't see the average counting of time to be 60 seconds. When you observe a clock, you're going to see the same passage of time, but that's not the passage of time. When you're looking at the idea of just examining a clock and watching the seconds tick, you're not actually looking at time. You're just looking at a clock that's, again, just showing the movement of seconds through the device that it is. That's not the passage of time. What we're actually looking at through the passage of time is what I've talked about in the lives. It is magnetism. And in Egypt, the magnetism of time operates much differently than where I am here in my home in British Columbia, Canada. Okay? And what is this all about? Why is it different if I was to go somewhere like Egypt, where the passage of time is much slower? Okay, so I could say slow Egypt, slow time in Egypt, and here in BC, Canada, it's fast. So this again is something I've noticed right away, right? As soon as I get home, it's like the days are not long enough. I'm doing work and it just feels like I've been working for maybe about an hour, yet like 3 hours have passed. Whereas where I'm looking at Egypt, when I was there, I was doing work as well too. And I work for about an hour and I see that it feels like only 20 minutes have passed. Okay? So there's a dilation relating to the passage of time when we're looking at these two examples. So for those of you who have been to Egypt, and maybe you come from a place that has, again, a lot of forests, mountains, lakes, right? A lot of flora and fauna. And then you go to somewhere like Egypt, and you just feel like the passage of time moves so much slower. In fact, I was joking with my group. I'm saying, well, guys, don't worry about being too much in a rush. Remember, we're on Egyptian time. Everything's a lot slower. And they were feeling it as well, too. I said, yeah, like time feels like it goes a lot slower when you're in Egypt. But when we go back to the heavy forests, we go back to the flora and fauna, we go back to the mountain ranges, everything feels a lot more quicker. It's a lot more of an acceleration that's taking place. So what's the hidden science behind this? Well, in order for that to actually be what it is when it comes to the passage of time, it involves magnetism. So the magnetism that represents time, because all magnetism really represents in this instance is the flow of event, right? That's really what we would refer to as the magnetism of time. It's the flow of event. But when we look at time itself is nothing more than a ruler, right? So you got a common ruler here, right? You got your centimeters, your inches, etc. Well, time just represents a temporal ruler. That's why we have a clock, right? 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000. We have a measurement of time, but time itself really does not exist. But we're looking at the magnetism, the magnetic current of the passage of time. So this is what happens. When we're in somewhere like BC, or again, maybe there's some other beautiful forest areas, mountain ranges, again, flora and fauna, a lot of wildlife, a lot of lush green surroundings. Well, what is a common denominator with those particular types of places? Well, it is carbon rich. Okay, so when you're looking at mountain ranges, when you're looking at forests, lush green environments, you're looking at a great amount of carbon. Okay, so carbon, in regards to the location in question, like I said in my example, is British Columbia. Carbon enables the magnetism of the passage of time to accelerate, to become faster. Why? Because carbon complements the thickening of the magnetism that represents the flow of event in our world, right? Carbon has that particular capability of it. Just like oxygen is used with fire, right? Oxygen fuels fire. Carbon fuels the magnetic passage of time. It accelerates it, right? It's like a fire starter, or in this way, a passage of time starter. So if we're looking at the idea of magnetism, of the passage of time, then carbon is causing it to accelerate a great deal more. Now, let's go to the example of Egypt. And again, here are the lines of the passage of time. And when we go to Egypt, well, does Egypt have a lot of carbon? Not really. What is Egypt well known for? Well, it's well known for its granite, sandstone, but most importantly, of course, it's sand, and silica, crystal. Okay? That is what Egypt is well known for. We look at the pyramids, right? We have all these granite blocks, limestone blocks. Sorry, not sandstone. That's a mistake. Limestone. I mean, sandstone is part of it, but limestone is actually what I'm looking to call it. So granite, limestone, sand, silica, crystal. Okay? So we could say that it is a rich silica or crystalline environment because of its surroundings. We're in the middle of a desert. We have a great deal of granite, limestone, sand. So what does a crystal do? Well, here's something that people may not know. Okay, if we're looking at a common crystal here with two terminator points, okay, we got the facets here. A crystal is a magnetic absorber. It absorbs magnetism into dielectricity. Okay, we can call it the dielectric, we can call it the 0 point, we can call it the vacuum, we can call it the substrate, we can call it the ether. But primarily, when you're looking at a crystal, the crystal is absorbing a great deal of that surrounding magnetic field because, again, a crystal is absorbing that directly into the dielectric, right? The crystal itself is a dielectric capacitor. So when we're looking at a place like Egypt, again, with granite, limestone, sand, silica, crystal, it is taking the magnetic passage of time and reducing it significantly, thinning it out. Not completely thinning it out, because if we had a complete and total thinning out of the magnetic field of the event of time, we wouldn't experience everything. You'd just basically be in a state of stillness, okay? But what it's doing is it's thinning it out, right? So looking at a carbon-rich environment like BC, comparing it to a silica-rich environment like Egypt, it would be something like this. Okay? You can look at the differentiations pertaining to the spikes. So, Egypt being more silica or crystal rich, the magnetism is in fact slower. And like I said, you will experience this for yourself when you decide to go to Egypt. Okay, it's not just Egypt. Basically, places that are large deserts, even some places in North America, wherever you go, right? Wherever there's deserts, it's that silica presence within deserts that help to slow down the passage of time. So the passage of time is the true nature of how we would understand the flow of event. Not time as a measurement, but the actual passage of it as a magnetic. So again, the majority of the locations on the Earth are carbon-rich zones. It's not to say that we don't have some desert around, but that doesn't cover up the majority of the landmass on the planet. It has a considerable amount. But really, when we're looking at areas that are silica-rich, it affects the passage of time. Everything feels like it's moving a lot more slower. Whereas we're going into carbon-rich areas, carbon-rich zones on the planet, everything feels like it's speeding up. So again, when we're looking at the nature of magnetism in that sense, of what's taking place, there is definitely an acceleration that has been going on here. Because even when we look back, going back into like the 1990s, early to late 2000s, even time itself didn't feel like it was speeding up as much as it was as compared to right now. So basically what's happening here is if we're looking at the Earth, there are tremendous shifts going on to where the magnetic field is actually fluctuating. And the fluctuation of the magnetic field, specifically in areas that are carbon rich, is moving us into a greater state of acceleration. And because the landmass on the Earth has a larger majority of carbon-rich zones, this is exactly why we're experiencing an acceleration of time through the fluctuation of the magnetic field, where again, the carbon-rich environments are moving into a much more hasty, a much more accelerated time dilation, event-based process or acceleration. So we're actually speeding up through those of us that are in carbon-rich environments, where the acceleration of time is actually going to be condensed a little bit more. Now, of course, if you're in somewhere like Egypt or any other particular silica-rich environment, you're not really going to be affected by it too much. Okay, you're still going to experience a slow passage of time. But if you are in the carbon-rich zones, anywhere where there's lush forests, a lot of greenery, a lot of natural wildlife, and so forth, you're going to be experiencing a strong acceleration of time. And as I've talked about, this is where we are right now. Okay, so we're looking at this hourglass, and we're right about here. Okay, and this hourglass is going to continue to have the flow, the passage of time, continuously condensed, which means the event of time is going to accelerate a lot more. Okay, that's really what I'm talking about. Again, I'm not talking about the clock. I'm not talking about looking at seconds or looking at minutes, because like I said, that's a measurement. We're looking at the passage of time that correlates to the magnetism of events. Okay, so events are going to be speeding up. They're going to be accelerating. Because right now, again, back here, I would say first, is we're looking at the 2012 timeline, where the benchmark that began the acceleration of time commenced. And moving from 2012 into 2038, we're going to be crossing the threshold. We have the event. Then from 2038 all the way down to 2064, the wider berth of the magnetic flow goes back into a state of normalization. So right now we're in an accelerated magnetic passage flow of event right now here in 2025. So this again is giving us the idea that time itself is indeed not linear from what many of us believe. Because if you have to go to somewhere like Egypt to notice that the passage of time, that the nature of event operates a lot more slower, and then you're going into a rich forest environment filled with carbon that enables it to go faster, the passage of time, then time is not linear at all. Okay? And time is not a dimension either. Time is a magnetic, right? So basically, we're looking at things as planes. And of course, people may argue with me and say, "Well, Brad, what are you talking about? Of course, there must be dimensions, right?" No, there isn't, because dimensions are just rulers. Dimensions are conveniences for sleepy science to enable itself to balance out its equations, working at limited quantities, looking at its own mathematical calculations. That's why I don't use dimensions. That's why I don't use virtual photons and phonons and gluons and all of these other ridiculous terms that it provides. It utilizes that for the convenience of its own equations. And they even admit this. You can talk to some of the big names in general relativity or general mechanics, quantum mechanics, they'll tell you the same thing. Yeah, we use photons and virtual photons and gluons and phonons, etc., as a means to balance out our equations. And we use dimensions as well, too, as kind of like rungs of a ladder to balance out quantities, to basically balance out our quantum-based calculations. There's no such thing as dimensions. There's no such thing as photons. There's no such thing as virtual photons. There's no such thing as phonons or gluons or whatever fancy, elf, fairy, leprechaun silliness you want to put in there. We're looking at something pertaining to planes. Planes is much more viable into looking in regards to how the universe properly functions, because we're looking at the nature of density residing within those planes. Right? So you have a material plane, you have the astral plane, and you have the causal plane. Okay? Now, when we're looking at the material plane, magnetism pertaining to the flow and passage of the event of time is strong here. When we're looking at the astral plane, there's barely anything there whatsoever. Okay? It's much more non-linear. When we're looking at the causal plane, I could basically just keep this line flat. Okay? So the magnetic is much more stronger in the material plane. The astral plane has a very small amount of that magnetism. The causal plane hardly has any. It's there, but it's a very, very, very thin amount. Okay? So again, magnetism represents a low pressure system. Okay? Magnetism is the result of inertia. Okay? It is a low pressure system when we're looking at the two geometries that make up the entire universe. Okay? You have the donut here, and you have the hourglass here. Okay? And we refer to this as a hyperturcoid, right? The hyperboloid and the torus. Okay? When you're looking at the flow of magnetism, magnetism flows through the torus field. Okay? The torus field is that clustering between magnetism and the dielectric, or again, the etheric, or again, the 0 point or the substrate. You can call it whatever you want. But nonetheless, magnetism is going into interference pertaining to the dielectric. The dielectric is right here. Okay? So here's the hourglass. And what the dielectric works, how it works, is it brings everything back into center. It converges everything back into the center, back into the one. As it converges everything back into the center, into the one, this is what we refer to as centripetal convergence. This is even Ken Wheeler's own interpretation of it, and he's extremely accurate. You can check out his YouTube channel, Theoria Apophysis, right? He's got some brilliant ideas. So looking at this, pertaining to the dielectric, pertaining to the torus, okay, this is giving us the nature of time. Time would reside here within the donut. But there's constant interference patterns, perturbations, skewing between the magnetic and the dielectric, or again, the magnetic and the 0 point, or the magnetic and the substrate, or the magnetic and the etheric. Okay? Etheric, like I said, the dielectric, the 0 point, is working to bring everything back to the center. Magnetism will leave the center and go outwards. Okay, so that is what we refer to as centrifugal divergence. It's diverging itself. It's moving outwards. It's moving out from the center. Okay, this is where we have what's known as a plane of inertia. Okay, the plane of inertia is where the magnetism itself functions as a low pressure system. This is why the majority of life on the Earth is found within the equatorial regions of the planet. When you start going further north or further south, the amount of life on the planet generally decreases. It's not favorable. It's not to say that you can't live in those areas, but it's not favorable in regards to the inertia plane, right? So we're looking at the equatorial zones, or the equatorial zone of the planet. And like I said, this is where a great deal of our own passage of time exists throughout the equatorial regions. So again, that is where the time field, the field of time, as it were, the field of the passage of time exists the strongest, is right here, around the equatorial zones. So, understanding this right now, we are indeed going through a very heavy fluctuation on the planet that is causing the flow of event to accelerate, specifically when we are in carbon-rich areas of the planet, where the flow of event is decelerating into silica-rich areas of the planet. And in understanding that altogether, we have pretty much already disproven that time is linear, right? Because again, through the scientific model, time should never function like that, right? The idea of the flow of time or the passage of time should never function like that. It should always be stable, but it's not, because time is a field. It's a magnetic field. And now that we know that we can create interference within that field, we realize that time is bendable. We realize that we can basically experience a slower passage of time being in a silica-rich environment, and we can experience a much more higher acceleration of time being in a carbon-based environment. Carbon fuels the natural flow of the passage of time. Silica decelerates, decreases, slows down the natural flow of the passage of time. This is what I've discovered when I went to Egypt, because I was seeing how slow the days were going. So again, what's happening here on our planet is the magnetic field is fluctuating. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot more interference, basically clashing between the magnetic and the dielectric. A lot of it is speeding up. So when you are in a carbon-rich environment, you're going to notice that not only is there acceleration, there's mass acceleration. We're getting more and more of these events coming together. And as we continue to go down the funnel, we're going to notice that those events are going to happen a lot more quicker, and it's going to be a lot more prolific. As we continue to go down the funnel, right into 2038. 2038 is the conjunction point. It is the event. Once we go through the event horizon and come out the other side, which is basically going to be seamless, hardly anyone's going to notice that this is even happening, but nonetheless, it's going to take place. We're coming out the other side, and again, we're looking at those bars. It's like a ping pong ball that's just bouncing back and forth against smaller walls, and then it starts to widen out, and then by 2064, the entire nature of the normalization of time, which represents our magnetic field around the planet, is going to start stabilizing again. We're going to have much more of a normalization of event, right? But there's still going to be that acceleration and deceleration of time based upon where you are, carbon-rich zones or silica-rich zones. So there you have it. This is basically saying goodbye to believing that time itself is linear, and that time itself can be influenced based upon the amount of carbon or the amount of silica within your environment to actually experience the passage of time differently. And as our planet is going through flux, a great deal of fluctuation of our magnetic field, where the interference patterns between the dielectric and the magnetic are continuing to fluctuate, we're seeing a mass acceleration. But again, even when you're in Egypt, where there's a lot of that mass acceleration of event, those amounts of events are still going to pass very slowly. It's just a fascinating phenomenon. And maybe this is something that we need to explore a lot more. But I can tell you, just from the observer, just being able to look at this, being able to look at the nature of the passage of time a lot more in utilizing this model, this is making a lot more sense. So where are you in the world? Are you in a carbon-rich environment? Are you watching this from a desert? How's your flow of time? Again, many people may say, oh yeah, it's going pretty fast, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of forests, and maybe I'm in the city as well too. Well, the city itself depends, right? If it's a city that's in the middle of a carbon-rich environment, it's going to accelerate. If it's a city that's in the middle of the desert, it's going to decelerate. It's not so much about the city as it is about the environment that surrounds the city. That's the key. All right, so I wanted to share this with all of you about understanding the nature of the passage of time, looking at the inner mechanics of the passage of time to show that the passage of time can indeed accelerate or decelerate based upon the carbon-rich or the silica-rich aspects and facets within its environment. Thank you so much for watching. I'll speak to you again in another perspective of the now. Take care, namaskar, and may be well with you. Bye for now.
Let me hear the wisdom transmissions. The wisdom transmission.